Oh, hello, my baby gorillas. And I am 2 minutes early. It's not like me at all. Let me just see if everybody's on here. Everybody on. Let's give us a wee hiya, Dave. And good to see you. To see you, nights. Well, let's see what Joe's saying. See if he agrees with me. And don't forget, Joe Rogan. I mean, what a multi-talented guy. Not only one of the biggest podcasts in the world, James English, I think, is the Scottish equivalent of Joe Rogan. James English is doing a fantastic job, getting millions of views as well. He's our Joe Rogan. But Joe is also a competent political commentator, but he's also a comedian as well, don't forget. And he's also a brilliant sports commentator as well as a mixed martial artist. So, multifaceted individual is Mr. Rogan. So, the other day there was a group of, I think self-described patriots, and allegedly, and these people look very well organised and looked like they were the feds. Basically, it looked like a wee bit of a false flag. The Lotus Eaters have commented on it. I commented on it. There's a lot of on Twitter, and there's a lot of discussion about where this group just popped up from. So let's have a listen to what Mr. Rogan's saying and see if he agrees with this. I don't even know if it was a white supremacist group, but it just looked like a bunch of patriots with the flags marching, but in uniform. But it didn't look right.
Telling me the FBI is not monitoring fringe groups, and they were not aware that these people were this fucking organized.
But they haven't really done anything. I mean, marching with flags, I think, is protected in law.
Out of nowhere, they pop out with the same size flags and the same outfit on, goose stepping. They're walking, not goose stepping, but walking right at the same pace in a fucking orderly line. Like, who organized this?
This is them on their bus. I thought this was gonna turn into the video of them walking.
See the video.
This is like the Justice Smollett of groups. This one
of them walking. Is that the video of them walking?
Like these are linking to blog posts, so it's not gonna.
God, there's got to be a video of them walking. I know. I've watched it. So here's it. Uniformed white nationalist group marches on Lincoln.
But how do they know they're a white nationalist group? Just because they're all white. So being white means you're a white nationalist. That's what and we'll come to this with the CRT, the critical race theory. The white supremacy just means liberal democracy, and they call it whiteness. And then you have blackness. So you have the strange situation where Larry Elder, who's an African American gentleman, who's fantastic, great guy as well, who is called a white supremacist or white supremacy in blackface. And blackness, where you can be white and part of blackness as well. And to me, what blackness is, because there's no obviously ideology called blackness or whiteness, what they're actually, the underlying concepts they're talking about is a liberal democracy, a libertarian liberal democracy versus an authoritarian Marxist or even a libertarian Marxist ideology. So either or.
Lincoln Memorial, CNN's all in.
And I think that's what they mean by blackness, because obviously blackness is not, as I said, the political ideology.
They're like, we're all in on this. Come on, show us. Look at these guys. Look at these guys. Where's the fat people? How come they're all wearing the same clothes? Do that again. What the fuck is this? Have you ever seen anything that looks more like feds? Tell me that doesn't look like feds.
He's very funny, Joe.
Right?
It's like the 101st Airborne.
Bro, look at this. These guys are all runners. These guys look like they just got out of buds.
I mean, look,
fuck out of here.
They could be real.
Right, they could be real.
They could be real.
Listen, Matt Taibbi, I'm an unreliable source, and I'm a comedian. But looking at that, I'm calling bullshit. Give me that again. Give me that again.
Yeah, okay.
Well, this gets back to like the Oklahoma ivermectin story where
thhere they're all wearing winter coats.
Yeah, like you know.
Look at this. The fuck out of here. How do they all have like uniformed outfits on? They have the same color pants for the most part. Very little variation. They have tan or brown pants, dark blue shirts with a fucking stupid flag on it. This asshole's got a drum. Back that up. Look at the fucking drum. Bitch, are you Paul Revere? What the fuck are you doing with that drum? He's walking around with a band drum,
it's
like
white
a high
power
school
drum
band.
line.
This is so stupid, it hurts my feelings. They all have flags. Keep that up there.
Well, I was trying to find, there's videos from them from like July.
But I'd like to see that again.
So you know what's so interesting
so
about this, though? Is that, again... Oh, okay.
I just need to see it. Go ahead, tell me.
So...
Look at this. I mean, maybe they're real. Maybe they're real. Could be real. But I'm calling bullshit. They have the same fucking size flags, the same white coloring on their face, the same tan hats on. Get the fuck out of here.
And why are they wearing masks, by the way? Like,
because they're cowards.
Right.
Or they're feds.
Yeah. Like...
Right?
Yes.
So, I mean, that's very funny. He's very funny. Just make sure that I'm actually on here. Let's just check. Make sure we're live here for the CRT. Is this working? Oh, ho, ho, we're in.
Congratulations!
Oh, ho, ho. Live, right. That's good. So, it's funny, it usually shows up here. And I do, when I go live, and it's not even showing up here, which is very interesting as well. So, what have we got? So, Jojo, let's go through what's on Twitter, and we will get a wee catch up with what's happening here. Let's go to Talk Radio and find out what's happening in Talk Radio.
Love Actually rewards toxic men.
Oh. Does it?
Yeah. Bridget Jones is archaic, champions sexual harassment.
I love Bridget Jones.
Everybody does. And Jack Black apparently is a dangerous sociopath in The Holiday.
Is he?
Well, I don't think I know The Holiday terribly well.
No, but I did watch Trading Places the other day, one of my favourite
it's a great film.
Christmas movies ever. And I pressed like the info button just to see what it was about. And all it says, the only thing it says about it, doesn't describe anything else about the movie other than this movie contains outdated attitudes and sexual imagery, which some may find offensive.
He said that before Trading Places?
Only description, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because I think that there are certain racial slurs in there, and you see Jamie Lee Curtis's breasts as well.
Well, that's not terribly traumatic, is it?
Well, it was for me.
Was it? Just before the show started.
So, quite funny there. That was quite funny, entertaining. So, what else have we got from Talk Radio? What's this?
Christmas party.
I'm not surprised. So you should be.
I lost my mum last October. Very, very sudden. All her blood tests were put off because of COVID, and her endoscopies were put off. And then she was told she had 2 months to live. She then went into hospital and got COVID, and none of the family were able to visit her.
That's awful.
She died on her own. She was a wonderful mother of 4 and granny of 10 grandchildren.
Oh.
And no one was holding her hand when she died. And I've really struggled with it. And I really have struggled. We all abide by the rules at her funeral. We had a very, very small funeral for her, which she didn't deserve. She deserved to have so many people there because she was such a wonderful woman. But we all abode by the rules. We had a very short funeral and no wake after.
That's awful. I'm so
and
sorry.
I am just disgusted to see this Allegra Stratton laughing.
So let's go through to Allegra, and obviously we'll come back to the other parts here. So what was happening with Allegra? Oh my God.
It was a business meeting. And it was not socially distanced.
All guidance was followed completely during number 10.
We've moved, I'm pleased to tell you, from the metric-backed imperial system. I know you were at least 2 inches.
I don't even think there were parties that I'm aware of.
Last Christmas, were Christmas parties allowed in London? So look, if you're so generally no.
No. We can agree it was wrong. If it happened, it was wrong.
If something unsubstantiated from anonymous sources actually materialised, then of course it would be wrong.
The Prime Minister has been very clear that the rules were followed at all times in Downing Street.
I've just seen reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party on Friday night. Do you recognise it?
I went home. Hold on.
I've been reassured that all guidance was carefully followed as it continues.
Does that answer your question?
With all sorts of things in number 10 and in accordance with the rules as you would expect.
Did the Prime Minister condone how you Christmas?
What's the answer?
I don't know. I think possible party was cheese and wine.
Is cheese and wine all right? It's a business meeting.
I'm joking.
This is recorded.
I don't even know if the event took place, but if it did, that no rules were broken.
Why should British citizens trust an administration that does not follow the rules on COVID?
Well, we do follow the rules on COVID.
Do you not think, for equality and fairness, that if anybody has broken the rules, that they should lose their jobs too?
Well, that's one of these questions that starts with if, and we don't, and that shows that we just don't know.
Are you really saying, even after that Allegra Stratton video, that we don't know there was a party?
I can tell you that the guidelines were followed at all times.
Well, did you investigate that yourself? Are you satisfied yourself?
I have satisfied myself that the guidelines were followed at all times.
I see we're all here obeying regulations, aren't we? I mean, this party is not going to be investigated by the police in a year's time. You are all very carefully socially distanced.
So that was from Momentum. Obviously, far left part that might be joining George Galloway's. There's another socialist there.
Fictional party.
So, what else? I don't think Allegra lasted very long. I don't know. Oh, there she is here. So, this is her.
Can you stop, please? Can you stop? I'm going to make a statement. You don't. The British people have made immense sacrifices in the ongoing battle against COVID-19. I now fear that my comments in the leaked video of the 20th of December last year have become a distraction in that fight. My remarks seemed to make light of the rules that people were doing everything to obey. That was never my intention. I will regret those remarks for the rest of my days, and I offer my profound apologies to all of you at home for them. Working in government is an immense privilege. I tried to do right by you all, to behave with civility and decency, and act to the high standards you expect of number 10. Rightly expect of number 10. I will always be proud of what was achieved at COP26 in Glasgow and the progress that was made on coal cars, cash and trees. This country and the Prime Minister's leadership on climate change and on nature will make a lasting difference to the whole world. It has been an honour to play a part in that. I understand the anger and frustration that people feel. To all of you who lost loved ones, who endured intolerable loneliness, and who struggled with your businesses, I am truly sorry. And this afternoon, I am offering my resignation to the Prime Minister. Thanks for your time.
Now, apparently, this lady, which I've never actually seen her apart from today, was actually recommended by Carrie, who is Boris Johnson's wife. Apparently, story has it that Dominic Cummings had somebody else who he wanted to put in as press secretary, but Carrie, who obviously not elected, overruled him. Obviously, Dominic Cummings being a very intelligent man. And this lady, who I've never seen before, has obviously made a mistake today in a sort of a cavalier attitude, shall we say, while other people have been suffering. I mean, these things happen. I'm sure she's obviously very upset, but she'll probably look back in this and seen the mistake. But the pressure is now on for Boris Johnson to resign, and because obviously we're all getting locked in our houses again. The Conservative Party are trying to bring in this passport for England, this whatever it is that they're trying to bring in. There's demonstrations outside Number 10 by people who are probably not anti-vaxxers, maybe anti-vax, some anti-vaxxers, some people who don't think the vaccine should be given to people who have already had COVID, or people who it should be maybe given to people who are in high-risk groups, but not potentially to everybody. And certainly people who don't think there should be a mandate for people to be forced to take vaccines and to be treated as second-class citizens. Ah, right, I see. Talking about second-class citizens, let's go to our friend, Mr. Alex Belfield. Is this it? Oh, yes, it is. Mr. Belfield, over to you. Another funny man.
As we know, little Jeanette McCranky up in Akai the Nicky Newland wishes that she was in Hollywood. Well, unfortunately for her, she's in Holyrood. It's a bit similar, it's just that there's a lot more people die of drugs. The reality is this woman says that she's...
I mean, it's sad the amount of drug deaths, and I'll come on to the drugs in a second, but it's sad the amount of people who have died in Scotland of alcohol and drug deaths under Nicola Sturgeon, and under this tyrannical reign where 99.9% of the people would survive COVID, as I have not taken any drugs and not had to go to hospital.
Living in the greatest place on earth, and it was until she started. She now has the highest drug death rate in the whole of Europe, some of the worst addicted people on earth, some of the highest poverty in Europe. And why? Because this woman has taken her eye off the ball. She's so consumed with teaching lessons to Boris and outwitting her colleagues south of the border. She's too obsessed with the notion of going back to Europe. Why the fuck she'd want to do that's beyond me. And indeed build that wall to stop us getting across without presenting our passport, getting a finger up our bottoms to prove we don't have the old clap, or indeed the Corona Omicron virus, which she has the #1 in the United Kingdom, by the way. Yes, she's...
Well, she's not, whatever she's doing, I would suggest that the people about her are doing the wrong things, as usual. Nicola will go down as the worst, wee Nippy will go down as the worst First Minister since the Scottish Parliament has been opened. Obviously a lot of people are voting for the nationalist reasons, but if you took away the nationalist versus the unionist reasons, she would go down as the worst First Minister on domestic policy.
She's #1 at last. She can't get any lower than that. It's nothing to do, by the way, with the old, gathering of the crop of shite 69. No, blame steps. It's all steps.
So Alex is right. So we don't know if the globalist meeting in Glasgow had actually brought in some of the variants of the coronavirus.
It's his fault. That was a tragedy, them doing that arena in Glasgow, wasn't it? It ended their careers. They've cancelled the tour. That's what'll happen when you go to Akai the Nicky Newland and you stand on the toes of Jeanette McCranky. She'll have you wiped out, finished, exorcised from showbiz. Anyway, that wasn't why you called. The reason for this video is I see that in the Scotsman they report that dinghy divers get free travel.
So now we're getting through Labour MSP Paul Sweeney said extending concessionary travel schemes should cost the government $360,000 a year, equates to whatever percent it is, but it's not the fact of that, it's treating people the same or treating people differently. And obviously this government thinks it's okay based on whatever characteristics that they think it's correct, that people should be treated differently and preferentially
on public transport in Scotland, and they want it extending. Can somebody explain to me how this woman believes that the rights of someone who has come here on a dinghy exceeds those who's in poverty, in need, or elderly in her very own Scotland where they were born?
Because she's not a nationalist. As she said, I am the furthest, couldn't be the further thing from a nationalist.
Howdy mush, here we go then for a Tuesday, and this really is an extraordinary story. I mean, the notion that you would prioritise those who are not from where you're from is incredible. This pisses me off as much as when you see those adverts for Virgin or Sky or BT and they say, new customers get a special for $9.99, and I think I'm paying $49.99. You'd rather look after someone who's never given you a penny than me who's given you 50 quid for the last 10 fucking years. Right, I'm off somewhere else. This is what they do, isn't it? They try and find virtue signalling ways of tickling the tits of these people and pacifying the lefties so they look like heroes. Why should the dinghy divers need to go anywhere anyway? Where are they going? No, I'm not being facetious. Where are they going? I mean, what do they need public transport for? Shouldn't we be more concerned about keeping them within the hotels where we're feeding them their 3 meals a day and giving them their iPhones and Sky TV and keeping them at a lovely 24 degrees so they don't get cold, new clothes and the 30 quid a week from the government paid for by us? All 50, 60,000 of them now, 28,000 of them of which have sailed here on the RNLI taxi so far this year. Where are they going? The notion that this woman would rather prioritise free travel for people who are not from Scotland than those who are is absolutely mind-boggling. They say it doesn't cost very much, just a few £100,000. Well, you can do a few cancer operations with that, my darling. You've got a terrible NHS there. In fact, you're being called to answer questions even today by your own ministers. The First Minister is being called to explain the absolute fucking debacle she's created with the whole COVID mess and her health system that she wants to believe, a bit like Meghan likes to believe in her truth.
The underhums are useless. The worst ambulance call-out times, I think, under her management as well. So that means that people will probably be dying because of the length of times for ambulance call-outs.
Truth that it's better than everywhere else. Well, it's fucking not, love. Nor was your handling of the old convicts in the first place. But the notion that this woman would give free travel to dinghy divers makes me want to heave. It gives me hives that she prioritises people who are not from her Scotland before anything else. It is.
Yeah, well, I mean, well said. Oh, is MD here? Where are you guys? Is MD watching? Let me just check, make sure this is actually somebody's here. Oh, we've got 3 watching, are you? Or are you just keeping it quiet, guys? Whoa, here we go. So, let's have a wee listen to this. Yes, he's great as well. I'm definitely, if you're keen to do this, subscribe to, what's Michael Heaver. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Michael. He's a very good political commentator as well. Go on, Michael, let's hear you.
Well, as I've highlighted before, not 1 but 2 December by-elections, 2 defences of Conservative-held seats. And of course, we saw with the Old Bexley and Sidcup by-election last week, the Conservatives hold on to that seat, more than 50% of the vote. Although we did see a bit of a warning from Brexit voters, from Tory voters, with Richard Tice, the Reform UK party leader, standing in that by-election and getting 6.5% of the vote. Well, there's now another by-election, of course, ahead of us, North Shropshire, after Owen Paterson's resignation, and perhaps signs that this could be a more challenging defence for the Conservative Party. Now, to give the context, consider at the last general election, the Conservative vote...
Well, and especially what's happening just now. I mean, there's rules for thee, but not for me.
In this constituency with North Shropshire, with Owen Paterson as the candidate, they got nearly 63% of the vote. But an interesting development today. First of all, Steerpike of The Spectator saying there's considerable discontent building on the ground amid anger in the Tory shires over party blunders, rising taxes, and an anti-politics sentiment said to be gaining ground.
Now, I spoke to a guy, and I don't know who the guy was. He said his name was Russell, but I'm not quite sure who he was. He didn't look familiar. I thought he was a Scottish MSP for the Scottish National Party, but I'm not quite sure. I've not seen him before. But he was talking to ITV, and he didn't want to go on camera, but I managed to ask him a couple of questions. And what he was talking about when he was talking to ITV was that the SNP are wanting to raise taxes to get more money. But I asked him, when you raised taxes last year, did the actual tax revenue not fall? So they got less money? And he said, yes, they did, but because the Scottish growth rate is so small, I think it was 1% or something like that, because the growth rate is so small, that was the problem. It wasn't that raising or bringing in higher taxes reduces the amount of tax revenue you bring in. So it's an inverse relationship. So the lower your taxes, the more money you bring in through taxation. And also, he didn't seem to realise that it was the incompetent economic management of the Scottish economy by the SNP that was keeping the growth rate so low. And then I asked him about what was happening with the Scottish stock market, and he said he didn't know. So I'm not quite sure how on the ball he was with that as well. The person who was meant to be bringing in this new Scottish stock market disappeared with £1 million of taxpayers' money. So it seems like the SNP really don't have a clue.
My old Brexit Party MEP, Mucker colleague Martin Daubney is standing for the Reclaim Party.
Hi, I'm Martin Daubney of the Reclaim Party. I was proud to represent you as your MEP for the West Midlands and go to Brussels to get Brexit done. But the hard work is just beginning. This government has lost control of illegal immigration. We will protect our borders, stop the boat. He cares about its new
by-election. And ahead of the vote, a local Conservative councillor defects to Reclaim. I believe this is the first Reclaim Party councillor in the country. Anthony Allen defecting to Reclaim, telling Steerpike the Conservatives simply aren't Conservative anymore, said his former party had gone soft on illegal immigration, lost control of taxation, obsessed with crippling green taxes nobody wants. Here is today the Reclaim Party leader, Lawrence Fox, with Martin Daubney and the new Reclaim Party councillor.
Hello, I'm Lawrence Fox, leader of the Reclaim.
From Brexiteers particularly, who, when you look at the polls, the reason the Conservatives have managed to, as a mid-term government, maintain normally pretty big leads over the Labour Party is because largely Brexiteers, Leave voters had stayed loyal to Boris Johnson, to the Conservative Party. There's signs now that there is some discontent now.
I would say it's more than some. I would say this is going to be... it depends how loyal the people are in the constituency to the Conservative Party, but I think there's enough things happening that there is more than some discontent that's happening.
Among Leave voters towards Boris Johnson's government, in terms of suggestions, I've spoke about it before, but the kind of things I think the government should be doing is, instead of negotiating with the EU into 2022, Article 16 should be triggered. The UK, as Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, pushed for, should be leaving the ECHR.
Which is the human rights legislation that's preventing the deportation of illegal immigrants. But Wee Nippy doesn't want the illegal immigrants to disappear.
Scrapping the Human Rights Act, as Conservative MPs are calling for now, to get a proper handle on the illegal migration crisis and ensure those who come to the UK illegally cannot be allowed to stay. And also the Conservative Party should actually, now outside of the EU with the ability to do so, carry out David Cameron's pledge to bring net migration down to the tens of thousands.
Well, I don't think a lot of people agree with that. It's certainly not going to happen under Boris Johnson, who does not want to and never has wanted to stop illegal immigration.
You're telling me
even offering amnesties to people who are illegally here as well. Joe's looking fantastic. Twitter did. Sure what this is.
Well, things get to terrible places one tiny step at a time.
So, Dr. Jordan Peterson is... hold on.
If I encroach on you and I'm sophisticated about it, I'm going to encroach 2 millimeters.
So the thing I don't understand about Dr. Peterson is that, let me just check this. The thing I don't understand about Dr. Peterson is obviously he talks a lot about politics, and he's correct about what he says about politics, but I don't know if that's politics is his professorship or his thing that he was teaching when he was at university. I don't think it was. I'm sure he does biology or something else. He obviously has a great understanding of politics, but I just don't know. I've never heard him comment on how he got into actually speaking about politics or whether he was just thrust into it. But he's very knowledgeable about politics and correct a lot of the time. And what he's talking about is the tiny steps into authoritarianism, which he's talking about just now.
I'm going to encroach right to the point where you start to protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. Then you're going to calm down. Then I'm going to encroach again, right to the point where you protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. And I'm just going to do that forever. And before you know it, you're going to be back 3 miles from where you started, and you'll have done it one step at a time. And then you'll go, oh, how'd I get here? And the answer was, well, I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone, and you agreed. And so then I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone again, and you agreed. And if anybody's interested in this...
So he's correct, and the things happen in the UK, and the only way, and I don't know if the British electorate are sophisticated enough, the only way to stop what he's talking about in the UK is to not vote for the Lib Lab Con Party, to vote for UK Reform or Reclaim Party or something else that is not the mainstream parties. That's the only way to stop this
sort of process. And this is a horrifying book. If you want to read about how this process works, you can read a book called Ordinary Men by Robert Browning. I just don't...
Well, that's certainly good to know. But new variants show the research and innovation must continue. I trust Joe Rogan more than I trust Anthony Fauci. Oh, right, I'm actually on Joe Rogan's thing, right? I don't think I was... Let's go in here. So PJW saying 740,000 missed cancer screenings, devastating mental health crisis, largest recorded rise in alcoholism, unprecedented assault on freedoms, massive economic damage. This is all happening again soon. Number 10 party has held Boris below the waterline. He's a dead man walking. So obviously the parties last year, so there's rules for thee but not for me. So Boris is probably in big trouble just now because of the fact that if they're not paying attention to this and they think they can give us rules but they don't have to take any, then Boris has got issues. This liar has broken every manifesto promise and may as well still be in the EU. So this is in the Express. Oof. So, number 10, COVID party has held Boris below the waterline. He's a dead man walking. So this is from Paul Baldwin, head of comment. Sometimes a journalist attempts to cleverly clarify a difficult situation can manifestly get in the way, muddying rather than aiding the understanding for the reader.
Because I begin by saying that I understand and share the anger up and down the country at seeing number 10 staff seeming to make light of lockdown measures. And I can understand how infuriating it must be to think that the people who have been setting the rules have not been following the rules, Mr. Speaker, because I was also furious to see that clip. And Mr. Speaker, I apologise unreservedly for the offence that it has caused up and down the country, and I apologise for the impression that it gives.
So, today is one of these days, by far the best way of conveying the anger, nay fury, experienced by MPs and their constituencies over Downing Street's COVID party is just to let quotes emerging from the extraordinary Prime Minister's question time do the work. Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, millions of people now think the Prime Minister is taking us for fools. Don't think Keir Starmer would be any better. I think he would be doing the same daft lockdowns. Surely the Prime Minister isn't going to start pretending the first he knew of this was last night. Even Ant and Decker ahead of him on this. Her Majesty sat alone when she was saying goodbye to the man she was married to for 73 years. That is the sacrifice which gives the moral authority to lead. Does the Prime Minister think he has the moral authority to lead British people and ask them to stick to the rules? SNP in Blackford, trust in the leadership is a matter of life and death. Downing Street willfully broke the rules and mocked the sacrifice we have all made, shattering the public trust. The Prime Minister is responsible for losing the trust of the people. He can no longer lead the most pressing issues facing these islands. The Prime Minister has a duty, and only right and moral choice left to him is resignation. So Boris has got big issues just now. I mean, he just managed to get a huge majority and has done very little over the last number of months, apart from lead far left policies. There is no dignity for the Prime Minister who simply doesn't get it. People have sacrificed extremely sacrificed in the extreme, up to and including people who are dead. Tech, what are you saying? Not sure what this is. Vlog FYI. So, this is a moment of moral reckoning. Is this man to lead these islands whose lives are at stake? Rosina Aline Khan, Shadow Mental Health, working as an intensive care unit. I wept behind my mask as 3 children talked to their mother on an iPad and begged her to wake up. Countless children now growing up without parents while parties were held at number 10. This is disgraceful and an insult to everyone that followed the rules. You're probably getting the idea now. This is very, very bad day for Boris. There is still a slim chance that this COVID party really didn't happen, as the Prime Minister contests, but you wouldn't bet on it, would you? And then there is truly damning videos of the PM handpicking, personally appointing Guerilla Stratton, whose horsey laugh at... as I said, this is potentially coming from his wife Carrie, Bojo's wife Carrie. Wanted this person to be the appointed, personal appointment, and this was resented by Dominic Cummings. Laugh as us ordinary rule following plebs will become political legend in the way Gerard Ratner's "my jewellery is crap" outburst became business legend. It is likely to have the same outcome. Ratner lost everything he had worked for, and Boris is genuinely heading the same way. That's what happens when you don't get the best people in the roles. His populist sureness of touch has gone for good. As each day passes, with each new scandal, he looks increasingly the dead man walking. This that it should be Stratton, an ex-Guardian and BBC journalist, which Carrie I think allegations have been made that Carrie advised Boris to appoint her. Journalists, remember, who brings him down just adds to the mix. Can I be the first to start? And obviously, there's been allegations that Carrie's been brought forward all these loony left policies and her speech at the conference and the influence that she has over Boris. Because obviously, the policies that Boris is following are not traditionally conservative or libertarian or even liberal. Can I be the first to start the conspiracy theory? She did it on purpose. Yeah. And that is potentially somebody that Carrie recommended Boris actually appoint. And yes, Boris kicked off today's PMQ with an apology, saying he apologised unreservedly, but he did not really. And he get rid of Dominic Cummings, who is a masterful political operator. His narrative was prepped with classical weaseling. He was sorry Stratton and his number 10 minions were seeming to make light of COVID. He ordered an inquiry, of course, long grass anyone, and he repeatedly told us he understood the anxiety of the public with slightly annoying air of a man who understood nothing of the sort. He spent most of the PMQs pulling his usual trick of trying to deflect the conversation to success of the vaccine, but this is really didn't wash. Taking us for fools now, Ruth Davison. Let's rip into angry Boris. Don't forget, Ruthie Baby is a corporatist globalist shill for the globalists. She's one of those. Not really a conservative either. More of a sort of Christian Democrat. It's interesting, this. I don't know what's happening with the... Let's just check something. So... let's go back to Michael. Michael's doing some great job. So what's happening with social media? And there's been talks that Donald Trump has bought over Parler, and that's going to be his platform.
Well, when it comes to social media, I mean, I personally have never spent less time on it really than I do now. I think one of the problems with journalism and what the left, particularly in terms of British politics, get wrong is they seem to spend way too much time on Twitter and using that somehow as a barometer of public opinion, when in reality it is largely a bit of a left-wing echo chamber. But nevertheless, we have seen a number of companies try and provide sort of a new alternative to Twitter. And one of those who's announced such plans, of course, is the former US President Donald Trump. Now, it's been reported that Trump was looking to raise big money for this new Truth Social, it's been called, set apparently to be rolled out in the first quarter of 2022. The Trump Media and Technology Group, TMTG, set to launch the app Truth Social by February 2022. Now, of course, this is very hard to do, as I say. A number of people have tried it. This is not an easy thing to get off the ground. One thing this project seems to have behind it, though, is money and finance, and a lot of it, because it's now been reported that more than $1 billion, that's right, $1 billion has been raised for Trump's social media startup. With the Trump Media and Technology Group and Digital World Acquisition Corp announcing that Digital World Acquisition Corp entered a subscription agreement for $1 billion in committed capital. Trump, chairman of...
I'm going to leave that there, but if anybody wants to get the rest of the end of that, the end of it's very interesting from Michael as well. Very interesting with the chat just now, guys. Don't know what's on the chat. Anyway, so there is obviously issues here. So let's go back to GB News.
I think that's their way out. I mean, that's why he's done it, isn't it? This is all a big distraction. Well, it wasn't an issue. But of course, like Mr. Cummings, now when Mr. Cummings clearly broke the rule, endangered people and travelled with COVID up to Durham, there was a tsunami of complaints. At the moment, there are I don't have anything like that, but it's early days. I think this Saturday will be very interesting.
No, I think it will be. And certainly early snap polling is quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's early and it's snap polling, but the numbers themselves are quite extraordinary. Comres is a reputable polling company, and 54% of respondees thought he should resign.
Yeah, I think you have to see how this plays out. I mean, the Prime Minister clearly says that he was advised that there wasn't a party, and he accepted that.
No. I'm sorry, Peter. He definitively said last week in the House of Commons and at the start of his statement today there was no party, and then starts to wheedle in a different direction.
But what I thought Sir Keir Starmer missed the point. He should have said, who advised you, Prime Minister? And then we'd have known where this was going. Now, if there's investigation and people... I mean, there might well have been stupid spads who had a party who think they're above everything else, and they need to be dealt with. But I think we've got to get to the bottom of that. I think the more serious problem for the government is what's been announced only.
So, I mean, it seems like it's piling up just now. Let's see what Nippy's saying. From the
decision makers in this, I vividly remember 18th, 19th of December last year being one of the most difficult points in a really tough year. So that's important. But then this inability, this seeming inability to be straight and honest with people, I think is a very, very serious charge line at the door of the Prime Minister. On the face of it, I don't see how the Prime Minister's accounts can be squared with what is now in the public domain.
Sturgeon ramps up orders for Scots to work at home. So you're back in your houses, guys. Some of us are fortuitous enough to be able to work from home. Vaccine or unvaccinated, we all have been lied to for months. Yes, well, I think this lady's correct, isn't she? Santa says no to vaccine passports. Well, obviously they're now trying to bring in vaccine passports in England, and obviously everybody should be out on the streets protesting this down south as well, guys. Nope. More advisors to help under finance. So Britain's rage at the extra 4.6 sent to the SNP. How are you going to misspend the extra funding? Katie Forbes, more advisors to help you understand finance. Who said that? Ed Steen. Yeah. As I said, they don't have a clue. A new iPhone, Elsa McFeely. Food hampers for Blackford. Don't give SNP one more penny. Britain's rage at extra 4.6. The COVID crisis is holding back the economy and piling pressure on the public services. Scottish budget, 5 key tests for the SNP government, 35 billion. Finance Secretary Kate Forbes faces major heartache as she prepares to set out Scottish Government spending pledges nearly 2 years into a devastating pandemic. Finance Secretary Katie Forbes faces a major headache as she prepares to set the Scottish spending pledge nearly 2 years after devastating pandemic. They were all just talking about money for care homes, and there was all sorts of spending, but no ability to actually increase the growth rate. Climate commitments, this is a first step. Patrick Harvey, coordinator of the Scottish Greens, said the first step on delivery of commitments to tackle the climate emergency made it the cooperative agreement with the SNP, healing the North East economy, protecting the NHS. Extremely challenging, however, with the increased spending. The Fraser Allender Institute has said meeting a target of 10% increase in NHS capacity will be extremely challenging. The think tank added the commitment to increase social care spending by 25% will not be sufficient to fully implement the proposals of the Feely review, such as establishing the National Care Service. A business boost. Sorry, we're closed. Many firms are continuing to face a fight for survival as a result of the pandemic. Wee Nippy's killing businesses left, right and centre with this nonsense. They were waiting to hear, and we've also got the highest number of COVID cases as well. What extra support can be offered by the budget, particularly with new restrictions potentially on the horizon in response to the Omicron variant outbreak? One of the key decisions to look out for will be the non-domestic rates. Miss Forbes announced extended relief in February, ensuring the retail, hospitality, leisure and aviation businesses would pay no rates in 2021. Retail, hospitality and leisure. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak reveals in October he's freezed the poundage rate used to calculate the business rates bill for the property in England. Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Nice guy Eddie Richard Tice. So Allegra COP26 has done right thing by resigning. Everyone in number 10 should resign or be fired. On the doors in North Shropshire today, fury, I've heard, was explosive. Ian McSquirter, my good friend, how to escape Johnson's war on drugs. Go to Scotland. So we've got the highest number of deaths in Europe, in the Western world, I think, because of Nicola Sturgeon. And no more Mr. Nice Guy. Boris Johnson has reached for a lever of law and order in an attempt to revive his battered administration. The UK government will be cracking down hard on middle-class cocaine users. Middle-class users like, himself and Gove, and levelling up ministers who've both admitted to levelling up quantities of Bolivian marching powder in the past. Very good. It's entirely clear how these middle class users will be identified as distinct from those from other social groups. Will these be property qualifications, school catchment areas, global stops? Traces of cocaine, we are told, have been found in Westminster, and sniffer dogs are to be deployed by presumably only to those MPs from non-working class constituencies. Oh, here we go. Oh, we've already seen that yesterday. So, here we go. Multiculturalism at its best. A schoolboy in Scotland. Shocking video shows schoolboy holding a gun and shouting Ali Akbar. So here we go. This is good. This is obviously positive.
Allah Akbar! I will bomb you, my friend! Allah Akbar! Not even right, the mask is not even right. Bro, I don't give a Okay, do it. Stop the video.
Everything that I said in my video and more was said to the NHS and to the General Medical Council in writing.
So, terrifying anti-terrorist experts scramble to Glasgow Street after a schoolboy with a gun shouts Ali Akbar, I will bomb you. And this was on the 7th of December 2021. Now, I don't know whether that's too serious. Obviously, it may well be a toy gun. But welcome to modern Scotland. Manchester man who posed as a taxi driver to lure and rape women is jailed.
Variant of coronavirus is here. Are there any cases in Scotland yet that you know of?
There are no cases identified in Scotland yet that I know of.
On what date did the piece?
Oh, look at this. This is funny. This guy, Huggy Bear, obviously, I would suspect a Rangers supporter, is always doing quite funny things.
Brussels, it's quite an achievement to have annoyed Pope Francis to such a degree that he now likens the EU to a dictatorship. This is the pontiff, after all, who has exasperated many traditional Catholics by being much more liberal than his two predecessors. In Italy, his dogged support for the rights of migrants, for instance, has marked him out as an enemy of populism. But should anyone think I overstate the case, listen to the Holy Father's words spoken to journalists on board his plane this week as he returned from an official visit to Greece. He'd been asked about a plan by the European Commission to make official communications more inclusive, to avoid using words like Christmas and indeed the word Christian itself. The spiritual leader of the world's 1.3 billion Roman Catholics said this: "In history, many dictatorships have tried to do this kind of thing. Think of Napoleon. Think of the Nazi dictatorship, the communist one. That is some comparison, but it reflects a growing frustration that's been developing at the Vatican over recent years. It came to a head in 2004. I was at the European Parliament in Strasbourg when all hell broke loose about the politician Italy had chosen to be its new commissioner. This was a man called Rocco Buttiglione, highly qualified, a professor who speaks half a dozen languages. He had one major handicap. He was, and I'm sure remains, a devout Catholic. Why was this a problem? Because the portfolio he'd been asked to take control of was politically sensitive. He was nominated to be the commissioner in charge of justice and freedom, and when he appeared before the European Parliament for a nomination hearing, the MEPs wanted to know how he, a practicing Catholic, could possibly stand up for things like gay rights. Buttiglione paused and chose his words with care. Although he said his faith meant viewing homosexuality as a sin, he was capable of separating his private religious views from those required by his new job.
Interesting. 24 councils go ahead with explicit pupil sex survey. I urge all Scots to email their local MPs and councils demanding answers, checking to see whether they are rolling out this. If so, fight it and make parents aware. There's the two nice fellas there, two very talented individuals. Establishing do-nothing candidates. Oh, and there we have, back to Rotherham, another individual.
Do you know what the legal age of consent is in this country? Well, it's 16. You have to be 16 to have consensual sex in this country.
So, obviously another one. Oh, so here's the man here. So the face of you realise when your BFF is no longer running Twitter.
It gets to the point where
things get to terrible places.
I think we've done that one. I want to objective news. I don't want to ideologically slant. I don't want the left-wing propaganda network, which is CNN has become. That's from Joe Rogan. Oh, there's more. This is what the future is.
Monitoring fringe groups, and they were not aware that these people were this fucking organized.
Things get to terrible places.
Oh, I've obviously done that a couple of times. Scottish budget, Tories call for 62 million of desperately needed police funding. We claim there are at least 3 different Downing Street parties, including Boris Johnson's flat. Oh, aye. What's this one? Oh, the chi goes up. Trying to look for. Oh, there's like, let's like that. British leads investment bank boom. Oh, there's the two MAGA supporters from Nigeria. Good shape they're in. Black Lives Matter. Oh yeah, this is quite interesting. So, we always thought that Black Lives Matter was a racist communist group, so we must push back on Black Lives Matter's Black Christmas segregationist view. They have no place in British liberal democracies, by Dr. Rakib Isham. Hope I pronounced that correctly. I've long argued that Black Lives Matter movement isn't anything but anti-racist and inclusive in nature, and this has been proven yet again. I've long argued that the Black Lives Matter movement is anything but anti-racist and inclusive in nature, and this has been proven right again. This is what they call blackness as well. The official Black Lives Matter account on Instagram recently shared a post that encouraged followers to buy exclusively from black-owned businesses in the UK, as well as claiming that white supremacist capitalism uses policies to protect profit and steal black lives. The organisation suggests 3 ways of supporting of its supporters to take part in Black Christmas: build black, buy black, blank black. This has been endorsed by British anti-racists that are racist social activists, once again demonstrating the importation of American-inspired divisiveness into our society, also backed by the political class in the UK, not just one across the board. Such initiatives essentially promote forms of economic racial segregation. It is particularly bizarre to encourage this in Britain, which fares very well internationally when it comes to providing anti-discrimination protection on the grounds of race and ethnicity. We also home to some of the strongest equality bodies in the world. The reality of the matter is that BLM movement has no interest in cultivating an inclusive anti-racist agenda for the UK. Indeed, an opinion poll, a poll by Optimum in November 2020 found 55% of the British public believe BLM has increased racial tensions. This view was held by a plurality of ethnic minorities. Britons, 44%. Even Labour voters were also notably more likely to agree than disagree with the view that BLM has heightened tensions between different racial communities for the perspective of social cohesion. These figures highlighted a worrying sense of growing division and antagonism. More recent, what's this in the Mail Plus? Recent data from YouGov similarly suggests that the British public have become more negative about the direction of race relations since the wave of BLM protests over the course of 2020, whereas 1 in 5, 90% felt that prior to the protest race relations were deteriorating. The figure had increased to 36%. Only 8% of the general population thought race relations had improved since the BLM protests. These figures are troubling. They are by no means surprising. It could mean, what are you guys saying? That is very strange. Donna Watson, Vast Tech. Charlie Vark Tech. Gabrielle Vogue, FYI. It could be argued that the influential element of BLM movement are not interested in social cohesion, much preferring the existence of a parallel social spaces. Well, there's a place called Africa that's got that already. But where some countries have got no white people, I don't know. It seems strange that you would go to a country and want to segregate yourself off. But I mean, that is the underlying Marxist agenda that's underlying the BLM. Racist Marxism from the Frankfurt School and from the Paris School in the 1960s. This will serve to fuel racial tensions and undermine the community relations. It is worth noting that the hard left policies associated with BLM movement are far from being well supported by black British communities. BLM-led defund the police narratives are far from being representative. Fewer than 1 in 5 black Britons support reduced investment for local police forces. Dismantling the market economy is also not popular, with only a quarter of black Britons, Afro-Britons, people supporting the replacement of capitalist system with a socialist agenda. So this, what they're talking about, whiteness is the capitalist system and blackness is the socialist system or the Marxist system. It's not just a socialist system, because you get different, obviously, flavours of socialism. There is certainly a debate to be had over the level of social and economic support provided by budding entrepreneurs in relatively deprived inner city areas of London, Birmingham and Manchester, as well as working class neighbourhoods in towns such as Luton and Slough. Young talented people with bright minds should be given the opportunity to maximise their potential. Well, I don't think that should just be based on race. I think there's talented people across the UK, regardless of what they call race, which is just different people's Magnolia accounts. This ought to be prioritised under the UK government's levelling up agenda. It is safe to say that the solution is not marginalising white British owners, especially those who implement sound anti-discrimination practices and may even be willing to share their knowledge with aspirational young people of all backgrounds. BLM Black Christmas strategy has no place in British liberal democracy, which is just a racist. If this was the BNP said you should only vote or only spend money in white businesses, then they would get seen as racists. Britain must push back on the American-inspired racial ideology with segregations worldwide. They cannot be allowed to sow the seeds of division in our multiracial society, which is could divulge, could cause problems later on. So let's have a look at this fella.
Birmingham in England. Thank you so much, Professor Andrews, for coming on the show. Before I get to how you begin this book with the amazement of a BBC Newsnight presenter, Emily Maitlis, famous for interviewing Prince Andrew, actually, her amazement about what you said about the Enlightenment, I better just ask you quickly about Bob.
So, but we're back to the anti-liberal stance, and what nobody's actually asked Professor Andrew is what he would replace the liberal democracy with, and if he is actually a Marxist or a socialist, what his replacement of capitalism, which is going to go into in a minute,
Barbados
would be,
which you delineate the genocide there of the Kalinago people in this new.
Don't know who the Kalinago people are.
Book. You say Her Majesty may be the premier symbol of whiteness on the.
So, I mean, I would suggest that this guy's a racist, and this is what we've got to understand, that there are black racists and anti-white racists in the UK, and I think he's a personification of this.
Planet Barbados, of course, which just became a republic. Why?
It's obviously Barbados have been independent for 50 years almost, and the idea that he still kept this queen, who is the primary symbol of white supremacy in the world, right? The British Empire, those links.
So I think we'll go on to. Is this all working? Don't know if I'm actually here.
Children like republic. Why?
Okay, so we're in. We are actually here. Am I speaking?
Obviously.
What's this one? Oh, that sounds better as well. That's obviously worked turning down that. So, one person watching. You can see that this is getting totally ratioed by Google and ABC or whatever it's called. So let's have a look at the Lotus Eaters. Where is that? Lotus Eaters. Trying to look for Shushu. And no comments, no ability for comments. Lotus Eaters. So let's look at what the guys have said about Barbados. It's something interesting. Where is that? Where is Barbados? Let's see your videos. Where is it? I saw it. I had it yesterday. Oh. Yeah.
Do you worry about performance in the bedroom? Don't skip this video. Ever been on a date and spent the whole time worrying?
Experience. We go to the next one. We have Muslim ordered holidays you can get, which include in the products private pool for Muslim sisters, babysitting for qualified Muslim nannies, massages by trained Muslim masseuses, personal Muslim chef, access to
of George Floyd. We are here today also to express our position against racism.
Ooh, they're against racism.
Against the exploitation of black working class people. That is what we are here today, comrades and friends. We have to make a number of demands on our government. Because racism is right here in Barbados. The Royal Barbados Police Force is not your force. It's the Queen Force. Every point that you must understand is the Royal Barbados Police Force loyal to Her Majesty the Queen and not the people of Barbados. Lord Nelson is your enemy. Lord Nelson fought a battle.
So that's not what I was looking for anyway. Where is it? It's a bit of a shame, is it? No. That's not it. It's strange. I don't understand why that's disappeared. So, oh, there it is there. Oh, one person watching. So, let's just get rid of that. So let's go back to this fella.
What that means to a place like Barbados, which was Britain's first slave colony. I mean, really, this is just not really news. This should have happened a long time ago. The real question is why do we still have the Queen as head of state? A place like Jamaica, where my family's from, of the Commonwealth. I mean, it's just a bad time that this monarchy was removed from countries like Barbados, I would say.
Albeit, of course, Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, did acknowledge the arguments, some of the arguments in this book.
Yeah, some. I mean, acknowledge is a nice way to put it, I guess. But I mean, even the fact that Prince Charles was there, I mean, I think sometimes it's good that Barbados has got rid of the Queen as a head of state. Does that mean that Barbados is a fully independent country that can run its own economy, that isn't in the claws of the West? Absolutely not. It's a symbolic change, but it doesn't mean necessarily that much of meaningful change, unfortunately.
Okay.
But he's not explained what he means there. So he may have a valid point, but how is that the case? What is it that is actually happening here with? I mean, the Labour Party controls it's all Afro-Barbadians in the Parliament. Should have got rid of the Queen as head of state. So what is it that is actually happening? He's not elaborated there at all.
Now to how you begin this book, which will appall all the Jacobins watching this program. I'd suggest to you. You talk about Immanuel Kant as an architect of racist philosophy. He was used as the justification for colonial genocides that preceded him and went on after, and go on to say, you could say similar things about Voltaire, Hegel, right up to Darwin, right up to Keynes and his attitude about the IMF being able to be used in case a monkey house was created in former colonies. What have you got against the Enlightenment?
Yeah. What about, other than the Enlightenment is just white supremacy with good PR, right? I mean,
and this is the thing that we have to understand, that what they are saying is that they're just talking about white people and liberalism. So liberal democracy, that liberalism, which is not defined by race. These communists from the intersectional postmodernist Marxist school are defining it by race because they're de facto racists.
The very idea, the notion that knowledge spread out of Europe in the 18th century and enlightens the rest of the world tells you that it's completely PR. This is not true.
I don't know whether it did that for the rest of the world, but it certainly did it in the UK. I would say that definitely at that period of the Enlightenment, that the UK transformed itself. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about.
Completely false. And actually,
why is it false?
The knowledge that we get from the Enlightenment is one which is the knowledge of white supremacy.
So, I mean, I think this guy's just a racist. White supremacy. But we're talking about it in the UK, where virtually every person was white at that time. The number of non-white people would have been minuscule.
Someone like Immanuel Kant, for example, who is the intellectual philosopher for our current framework of human rights, wasn't just a racist. This was somebody who actually advised slave owners in the Americas on how best to beat Africans, because he actually genuinely fundamentally believed that I was not a full human being because of my blackness.
I don't think he actually had ever met you.
That I couldn't approach rationality because of my blackness, and that he was better, superior, could understand the world in a better, more reasonable way because of his whiteness.
So again, this is where the issue is coming. I'll come. He's going to come on to it, and we'll be talking about this in a minute.
That's the people we're talking about when we're defending the Enlightenment.
I would suggest that because of the slavery aspect at that time, that because your ancestors had sold you as slaves, enslaved you and sold you as slaves, that this would have been the issue.
And you mentioned there our definition of human rights. We often talk about the human rights industry on this program. You can see echoes of the racism that you've identified in the so-called Enlightenment in the UN Convention on Rights of the Child.
Yeah, of course, because what does Kant, someone like Immanuel Kant is so important, because at the end of his life, he comes to the conclusion...
I don't actually know Immanuel Kant.
Slavery is bad, colonialism is bad, and creates this...
Well, it seems like he's right in your sort of wavelength then.
This universal rights framework, which we still have. But he doesn't think we're human beings, right? He doesn't think we're still fully deserving of the full rights. All we get is the right to life. In a very similar way as I would...
I don't know where Kant wrote, if he was in America at this point, but I'm not quite sure how he's interpreted this. How Professor Andrews interpreted this.
Say you shouldn't poach gorillas. I don't think gorillas are human beings. I just don't think you should poach them and kill them. And that's effectively what he says with this human rights framework, which is the right to life. Doesn't give you the right to equality. Doesn't give you the right to prosperity.
The right to equalities are completely arbitrary. Even in a communist society, you're not all equal. You're all equally poor in a communist society.
Doesn't give you the right to have all your stuff that has been stolen from you given back to you in reparations. And
so this is the thing that the difficulty here, and they're going to come on to this. Jewish people were given reparations by the Germans because they carried out the initial or the atrocities, but the reality is that as far as I'm aware, and I'm not a West African scholar, there was never any raids on by military forces to pick up slaves. All of the slaves were already enslaved by the Africans or Muslims and sold as slaves to be transported. So there was already obviously a working attitude or a working environment, because there's been registration of what was actually traded for the slaves. But what he's saying is that people didn't see them as equals, but they must have potentially seen the people that were selling the slaves as equals to actually trade for goods for the slaves who were already enslaved and sold as slaves by other Africans. And I believe that the slave trade in Africa preceded and happened after the slave trade had finished, the transatlantic slave trade. And we haven't talked about the East African slave trade by the Arabs, and I think there was Muslims involved in the West African slave trade, or the white slave that was actually done by Africans. None of this is taken into consideration, because I think Professor Andrews is actually an anti-white racist.
So when we have a world today which has the poorest part of the world being so-called sub-Saharan Africa,
but it was probably the poorest part of the world before colonisation or before anything else as well. It was probably the poorest part of the world at that stage as well. I would be very surprised if it was a very rich part and then it got poorer under colonialism and then it became rich again. There was a Chinese fellow in Africa talking about the fact that there was trains and the trains were allowed to go into disrepair when the Chinese didn't have trains, and when the post-colonial the trains were allowed to just the tracks were just allowed to rust.
Black people live. The richest part of the world being where the white people live, the West.
But that was through the industrialization.
And everyone else in between. And then you only have the right to life and not the right to prosperity. Then this is telling you that.
But there was hardly any people of an African origin in the UK. I mean, even up to when I was growing up, I would never see an African person. I've got people of an African origin, Scots, Afro-Scots, who were born in Scotland. But only when I went into Glasgow, in certain parts of Glasgow, there wasn't any African people here in Scotland that I'd met probably on a day-to-day basis. So there wasn't that exposure to that. And both in England and in Scotland, you weren't allowed to own slaves in the UK. So this was actually, Barbados is obviously a separate country and a separate political entity.
Actually frozen in time and in history the colonial logic, right? The colonial roots. And that universal, supposedly universal rights framework is key to that, because it only gives you the right to live and not the right to anything else.
You say that the Enlightenment racism had to wait for the defeat of Islam in Spain before conquering the United States.
Well, that was Africans invading Europe, wasn't it? That was the second time the Africans had invaded Europe, not to mention the white slave trade, where they were, I think, which preceded the transatlantic slave trade, where they were capturing and selling Europeans as sexual slave trades, as sexual slaves, in adherence with Islam, and also the East European slave trade as well, where the Turks were doing it.
United States, but also that very many parts of this Enlightenment come from, the Iran's Avicenna to China.
Yeah, well, this is the problem with the Enlightenment, is that it takes till the 18th century to have this conceit that Europe is the best, because of 200 years of just violence, right? 1492 unleashes the biggest genocide in human history.
I don't know what he's talking about here. I don't know what genocide he's talking about.
Where 60 to 70 million people are erased from the face of the earth.
Don't know what it is.
To conquer the Americas. That then triggered.
But I don't know how they know that there were 60, 70 million people in America at that time. Where did they get that number from? Where was the census? And I think what they're talking about as well is like smallpox devastated people, as tribes and things like that as well, as the fighting that happened as well. So I don't know if you can blame, you then have to blame China or Chinese people for COVID then, which I don't think is correct. So we already know like the Spanish flu, and there's been other COVID type respiratory problems all over the world as well. So that doesn't count as unless that was a deliberate biological weapon. But these travel right around the world anyway, which smallpox did, and I think smallpox devastated a lot of the American indigenous population. But also there has been European DNA predating 10 to 12,000 years ago in America. Obviously the Ice Age from Russia allowed people to bridge and come in from Mongolia, I take it, that type of China and that type of region into the Americas as well. But there was also an ice bridge. Britain was under a mile of ice 25,000 years ago, and there was also a land bridge going over to America from Europe as well. So that's probably why it explains why there was European DNA 12,000 years ago. I think one of them was discovered.
Slavery, again, massively unparalleled abuses of
Well, it's not unparalleled because obviously with slavery you're not killed to a great extent because you're wanted as a slave, I would take it. But obviously it doesn't compare to genocides that have happened throughout the world.
Those human rights, although we weren't seen to be human at the time, and the wealth that's generated from that.
But the richest African guy, or the richest guy apparently in the world, was also a slave trader, and he was African. I think he was an African Muslim.
Creates
and he'd sex slaves.
This illusion that Europe is superior, and so the Enlightenment were actually drawing
the illusion of European superior. I think at that precise moment in evolution, Europe was superior, but I think it goes through ebbs and flows of places being superior. I would have said that people building the pyramids were probably superior at one point. So ebbs and flows. I think you've just got a right bee in your bonnet about this.
Enlightenment thinkers were drawing on African knowledge, Arabic knowledge, China.
Every conquering culture, including the Arabs were in Arabia, in the desert. Muhammad, when the Muslim conquest came out of Arabia, conquered other people, and they brought in the knowledge from other conquered people. So did the Mongolians. Every place who have conquered has brought in knowledge from other places. And it's not just Europe, the Turks, every one of them. So I don't know what your problem is. It just seems like you've got a right bee in your bonnet. I don't know why you're here though. Why are you not back in Africa? If you've got such a bee in your bonnet about white people, why are you in a country that's predominantly white?
Chinese knowledge, but it's actually been whitewashed, like literally whitewashed. So when they take over, when the Spanish defeat the Moors, they start burning.
Africans that invaded Europe, that predated any of the slave trade, the Moors who asked for virgins to be sent to them as tribute to stop them invading other parts of Spain.
Burning books with all this Arabic knowledge but before they burn them, they translate them into Latin and change all the names. So it's generally possible that the Enlightenment thinkers actually thought all knowledge came from Europe because that was what they were reading, right? That was what they were told. So it's this whole myth of whiteness, of supremacy, that is only possible because of those centuries of colonial violence.
So it's not colonial violence when the Africans, Moors or the Africans invade Europe, but it is violence when we get it. So it's one rule for me and another for thee. All right, I see how this goes.
Which allows that intellectual conceit to exist.
Yeah, I'll get to some of the other myths that you try and destroy in the book in a second. But as I said about the Jacobins watching, I mean, you quote Malcolm X quite a few times in this.
I think he was a Muslim as well, which is a bit surprising considering I think it was the Muslims who sold a lot of the Africans in the West African slave trade, never mind the East, where they used to cut off the genitals so they can't reproduce. The West Africans were sold by Muslims, as far as I'm aware, as well. And some Muslims were slaves as well.
This book. Do you not think that in some ways this Enlightenment thinking can be used against the powers that are continuing to oppress people all around the world? You don't think Malcolm X, Che Guevara, Karl Marx,
all communists,
Gramsci,
100 million people have died under communism in the last 100 odd years,
use some of these things against the very powers that you criticize in the book?
You see that people have used these because obviously the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the UN Charter. I mean, Malcolm, my absolute favorite, uses all these documents when he founds the Organization of Afro-American Unity and says that we want the West to live up to its values. The problem with that is, in those documents, we are not humans, right? We're not seen to be human beings, which is why you can have a Constitution of the United States that says all men are created equal, and it's a bunch of slave owners, right? Because they don't see us as being human. So the problem when you use those documents.
Well, I think a lot of the people that had slave owners were starting to not or question slave ownership as well. But it wasn't just slave ownership in the United States. The Africans had been enslaving people prior to the transatlantic slave trade. It just seems like you have got fixated on transatlantic. Is there going to be reparations for the white slave trade done by Africans? Is there's going to be reparations for the invasion by Moors from Africa into Europe? Is it okay if Africans colonise but don't like to be colonised? I see.
Documents is that they are limited because within them they keep us fixed in this state of nature. They really do. Like the US, so you mentioned at the start the 156 years since the abolition of slavery. But in that 13th Amendment, that's the 13th Amendment that gives us the mass incarceration 156 years later, right?
So it's not people killing each other. I just saw this as well. So it's not like this happens.
To turn into one of these men being stabbed to death whilst...
So this is Honsho, which is in Scarcity Studios. These are very interesting criminal commentators.
The other one was on the run for his murder. On the 13th of July 2020, good friends 24-year-old Paulius Petrosawanis, known locally as Polo, and 21-year-old Sean Bull had met up in Heath Town, Wolverhampton. At around midday, the pair are captured sharing a laugh together. To his chest. But this was in... Polo was found breathing heavy, slumped over with his knees pulled to his chest. But this was in broad daylight, and to say this was witnessed by a few would be an understatement. I'd just been to the bins at the back of the flat when I heard awful blood-curdling screams, one witness said. Other similar accounts
so
were also...
I mean, it's obviously not allowing individuals to have their own situations. They're not accountable, obviously, for Professor Andrews.
Right, that you can still keep slavery in the incarceration system, and what do? They go and incarcerate lots of black.
So, black people are in jail, and African Americans are in jail because of slavery, and that's the reason that they're in jail. Maybe there is a degree of racism in it. Maybe there is, but if somebody murders somebody or commits a crime against somebody, then
black people, so that they can keep them in a state of slavery. So actually, within those constitutions and documents, you still have the roots of racism. So actually, I would say, throw those away. If you want a document that gives you rights and humanity and equality, it's the Haitian Revolution, the actual only real revolution of the 19th.
The Haitian Revolution, but Haiti is not going too well.
Century, where they have a document which declares the rights, full rights, for not just white people, for all people. That's a document I'd say is a much more secure.
Watch Haitian's Great Revolution. Who was the black Spartacus? Tous Saint Louverture. I think they fought against the French to get their independence as well, and their YouTube channel going underground.
to a rights framework.
What do you think of the fact that when you use these figures killed de facto by the Enlightenment, you somehow diminish the Holocaust, which has been a constant refrain by some voices in the international community, so-called, and indeed you talk about the curious way that a hallmark of Western development, the essential ingredient may be genocide, but intent. You say the twisted logic of Western scholarship, intent must be seen as the vital ingredient of genocide.
Yeah, so the Holocaust is massively important, like just a hugely important turning point in terms of understanding race, actually really important, particularly in Europe. But the way that we understand it is just bad. Like, it's just really the wrong way to understand it. And I borrow here from Zygmunt Bauman, who wrote a book, Modernity and Holocaust, where he said, look, the way that we typically understand the Holocaust is that it was these evil people, it was anti-Western, the Nazis.
I would say it was socialist, to be honest with you, but I say it came from Marx, which you seem to be quite keen on, the original underlying thinking of National Socialism.
They're terrible, they're the bad guys, and they did this terrible thing, and we should never forget it and make sure it never happens again. And the argument that he makes is actually completely the opposite. The Holocaust could only have existed within Western modernity, like literally.
Well, I think it was Western socialism, but I think what you're calling blackness now, it seems like that you guys are like the new Nazis, so you're racist Marxists, and they were National Socialists. It seems like, and they were racist against other people. It seems like you guys are just racist against white people.
Existed anyway. How would you kill that many people without the science to do it in the first place? And if you think about what it is that ends up, that starts a genocide, it's the concept of race, right? The Jews become.
Well, it sounds like that's what we've seen from Black Lives Matter, a Marxist organisation. The concept of race.
Subhuman, not people. Where do those ideas come from? Those ideas come from colonialism, and they come from slavery. We talk about.
But the Germans weren't that colonial. The Germans didn't have any colonies.
The genocide in the Holocaust, but we don't connect it to the genocide that the Germans carried out in Namibia, which is the forerunner to it. I mean, this is where they get all the ideas from. I
don't know about the genocide in Namibia, but I'm not quite sure where the. So they don't seem to have conquered a lot. German colonial. So that looks like up towards Namibia. Looks like it's up towards Nigeria. There's that Somalia, Kenya. Not sure where that is. So they didn't really have much colonisation by the Germans. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about with the murders or the genocides down in Namibia.
Ideas of racial science, the ideas of mass killing, etc. So, and if you actually put the Holocaust in historical perspective, it should be seen as on the same continuum as the genocide in the Americas, slavery, multiple.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure. They would have to give me a breakdown of the genocide in America. I'm not quite sure. I don't know where they get 70 million people that died, because how did there wasn't any record, so how can they get that figure? How do they know how many people were there?
Genocides in Africa. The idea that the West would kill lots and lots of people is not a new thing. The only new thing about the Holocaust was it was white people, right? And it was in Europe. It was a boomerang effect coming home. So it's not an aberration. The Holocaust was produced by the West, by racism. And if we understand it in that way, then we'll have a much better understanding of where we are and where we go forward.
Well, we invite all those UN human rights industry people on the programme to explain why certain cases like Namibia are not considered historically genocides.
I have no idea about what happened in Namibia with the Germans. I know about the Belgians in the Congo. I've heard rumours that there was a lot of people killed in the Congo, but I don't know anything about Namibia. I've got a lot of African friends as well, so
You mentioned the Holocaust, which, of course, is industrialized killing. In the book, you say you were taught complete propaganda about the Industrial Revolution here in Britain, in school, talking about an immaculate conception in British history of entrepreneurship and industrialization. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I went to a story where I actually got an email from my old teacher at school, because I've told this story a lot of times, where I was in A-level history doing Industrial Revolution, causes of the Industrial Revolution. And I think it's still taught the same, because I've been to a number of schools recently. And it is like immaculate conception, white people are great, all this science, price and work ethic, etc. And I asked the teacher in the class, what about slavery? And at this point, I didn't.
But as it taught that Africans and Muslims enslaved and sold other Africans, has there been any proof that Europeans, whether it be the Portuguese, the Spanish or the British, actually took any armies down to Africa? Because obviously, I think it was malaria, that the life expectancy of a European in sub-Saharan Africa was only a year. So is there any proof of any military activity in Africa by Europeans to actually capture slaves? Or was every slave captured by and sold by other Africans? And if that it was, which I don't know, I'm not a West African slave aficionado, so I'm completely open to learning. If it was people who were sold and captured by slaves, if you're going to talk about reparations, you would have to then talk about the people that enslaved and sold the slaves in the first place. So that would be other African nations, unless it could be proven that any of the Europeans actually captured the slaves in the first place. Obviously, it would have to be a number of. It couldn't be just like one expedition down there. There would have to be some sort of knowledge of continual expeditions into capturing slaves. But I don't think there was any military. I think that everybody was sold by other Africans and Muslims.
I didn't really know. I just knew slavery was at the same time, so it felt like it was probably related. And his response was, it's not in the textbook, let's never talk about it ever again, right? And that was it. We just never spoke about it. Because one of the central myths we have, and I'm from Birmingham, and Birmingham is Industrial Revolution, James Watt, they're saints here. It's a place where we have this progressive myth that we're great and we're wonderful. But actually, the Industrial Revolution is completely and utterly impossible without the genocide in the Americas and without slavery, because the key commodity.
So a genocide is a deliberate wiping out of people, and you would have to give me a breakdown of what happened in the Americas back then to actually find out if it was a genocide. What was the other thing said? And obviously the slavery, if, say for instance it wasn't slavery but people were actually paid for their labour, even if they were paid, they wouldn't have been paid a great deal. I would have suspected at that time there was indenture servants who didn't get paid at all and just got living costs, and they were white and European.
James Watt, they're saints here.
What did that say? Let me read that out. UK Department of Education said within the history curriculum there is a statutory theme at key stage 3 titled Ideas, Political Power, Industry and Empire, Britain 1745 to 1901, where colonialisation, slavery and industrial revolution can be taught. Slavery and industrial revolution can be taught earlier than A-level to all students have knowledge of the topic. But are they taught that it's Africans that enslaved other Africans and sold them as slaves? And is it taught that went on before and after the transatlantic slave trade stopped?
About it ever again, right? And that was it. We just never spoke about it. Because one of the central myths we have, and I'm from Birmingham, and Birmingham is Industrial Revolution, James Watt, they're saints here. It's a place where we have this progressive myth that we're great and we're wonderful. But actually, the Industrial Revolution is completely and utterly impossible without the genocide in the Americas and without slavery. Because the key commodities, gold, silver, tobacco, sugar, cotton.
But that's what made the money. So I don't think there's been economic reasons why slavery was stopped as well as the moral ones, because it wasn't making any, it wasn't a good system. And had it not been slaves, but had been actually paid work, the money would have still have came from the crops, and that's where the money came from for the Industrial Revolution. Although the labour was obviously slavery, if they had been paid, they would have been paid a pittance, and they would have still probably been doing the same jobs.
All of them are in what they call the Atlantic system, which is Americas and the Caribbean. All of them are produced there, and that's what is the spark for industry, the spark for wealth.
The spark was the commodities that were then sold on. I do agree. It did come from slave labour. We're not. I don't think we're both. I think we're on the same page there. But I don't think it would have made that much difference. It would probably increase the price of the goods, but it wouldn't have made that much difference if the slaves weren't slaves but actually paid labour. Because it would have been paid a pittance for doing the jobs anyway, had they voluntarily came from Africa to actually do the jobs. So it wouldn't have been they wouldn't have been paid a lot at that period of time anyway.
Spark for the growth of cities like Birmingham, not just Bristol, Liverpool, London.
So it was based on commodities, which I don't disagree, because that's exactly how we were actually taught, that it was based on slave labour, but it was the commodities, tobacco, sugar and everything else that was actually produced that would make the money.
Also Manchester. Manchester only becomes a major city after they connect it to a canal to Liverpool, when Liverpool is the major slave port in the world.
So I don't know about slavery in Liverpool. I don't know if slaves were brought to Liverpool or not. I'm not quite sure.
So when we think about the Industrial Revolution and we don't think about slavery, we simply don't.
No, I don't agree with that. I knew about slavery when I was studying as well. But as I said, it was really the produce of slave labour that was actually making the money, and that's where the money actually came from a lot of the buildings, etc.
Understanding the Industrial Revolution.
And there was also no slaves. I think there was somebody who was a slave brought over into Scotland, and the slaves were actually, hold on. What's happening here? I've frozen. Come on, where are you?
Properly.
Oh, we're back. Back. So, yeah.
At all.
So why is all of this cancelled, as it were? I mean, in a sense, your book is about cancel culture, as in, this seems to have been cancelled from people's education.
This is about politicians, it's about universities. Think about the place where these ideas come from. It is the places which I currently work in, right? Universities. It is about the textbooks, it is about the politicians, it is about the media, it is about the myths. And these are necessary because if you actually understand that the wealth that we have today, not in the past, is built on not just the historical killings of people, but the current day, the logic has not changed, right? The conditions in Africa, we couldn't even understand most of the conditions that most people live in.
But are you saying that the conditions in Africa were due to colonialism, or were the conditions in Africa the same prior to colonialism? Has Africa changed to the worst, to a detriment because of colonialism? And you'd have to give us worked examples of what that was.
Not even as Africa. Most of the world actually live in conditions that we have no experience of, right?
Was that already like that? Is that get worse because of Western intervention or better, or what's actually happened, and what is the issue there?
One of the startling facts that I came across in the book was a child born in Somalia today has more chance of dying before their 5th birthday than a soldier had of dying in the Vietnam War.
So that's a Muslim country. Somalia is a Muslim country just now, and it's controlled by like clan leaders or groups, and there's not Boko Haram, that's Nigeria, the other Islamist militants as well that are there. So you have to take like with like.
I mean, that's the conditions we're talking about.
Yeah,
so,
but is that because of Western intervention or things, or is that because of the way that they lived their life because of religious and cultural issues? So, I mean, blaming Whitey and everything, it's just...
if we were to accept that we have all this prosperity because children die by the second...
How do we get the prosperity by the people dying? You need to clarify that. You need to give worked examples. I would say that there was money, because of slavery, there was money not paid to the slaves, but it would have been a pittance anyway had it been not been slavery but actually paid labour. It would have been a pittance, but it may have been attractive enough for Africans to come over and live in the Caribbean. We don't know.
Then sure, we'd have to end the whole thing, right? So the system depends on that same colonial logic, and so we have to pretend, we have to cancel, we have to miss out all those bits to keep us comfortable, because otherwise we'd have to change something, right?
Professor.
So what are we going to have to change?
Mr. Kane Andrews, I'll stop you there. More on the new age of empire after the break. The World Bank and other figures, actually, Steven Pinker, others, as being more of the same, de facto apologists for racist Enlightenment policy. So presumably that's what you're talking about when you're talking about developing countries because of the loans.
Yeah, it's Enlightenment 2.0, right? That's what I call it in the book. Like, there is this idea that the West can be the solution, right? And we have this whole industry, and the development industry is the purpose.
So I'm not quite sure where he's going with this. So lending money, it's not precise. You can't actually analyse from what he's saying on the television. He doesn't go into great enough depth to be able to give an analysis, because he doesn't say why the loans are bad, or is it Africans misspending this?
Perfect one, where some of it's changed. Nowadays, they don't necessarily talk about evolutionary ladders, because they used to talk about it very clearly. Like, there's a process countries go through, and they can become like the West if you just follow these mechanisms.
But African countries are actually growing exponentially. The growth rate in African countries is... So this thing about confirm your choices, right? So the gross domestic product growth rate in African countries, 2021, Libya, 131%. My God. Kenya 7.6%, Botswana 7.5%, Niger 6.9%, Mauritius 6.6%, Uganda 6.3%. I mean, obviously I could work right down. I'm not quite sure what that last one is. Benin doesn't tell me. So even Abuja, is that Abuja? It's Djibouti. That the growth rate in these countries is incredible. So I'm not quite sure. I mean, I'm not really a big fan of Professor Andrews. I don't think he's making a lot of sense.
But the reality is that the West can't be the solution to these problems, because the West is the cause of the problems. Like, why?
blame Whitey.
Is that why does the child mortality rate so high in Somalia? You can't explain.
Yeah, Islam. I would say it was Islam and the clan nature of the conflicts that are that happen in by the gun that happens in Somalia. So, but if it's as if that you see Africans in a not as actually your equal, but that they haven't got the right of personal self-determination in the way that they conduct themselves. So Whitey, which you've complained about colonisation, does he have to go in and sort it out? And are these people, maybe they are in a conflict for resources or whatever they're doing within their borders?
In that with the history and the present, right? When organisations like the IMF in particular get involved in countries, all the evidence is it's bad for the country.
Yeah, well, I would agree that's a globalist institution, which I think we're on the same side there.
It's not good for the country, it's terrible for the country. So what's happening in this is there's an intervention in the economy, but it's actually making things worse in those countries. And one of the things we complain about a lot here is austerity, privatisation, neoliberalism. Well, that's what they've been doing.
Well, I don't know if that's a bad thing. I don't. So you're obviously coming at it from a political slant, a left-wing political slant. It would be very interesting to find out where you are in the political compass.
In Africa, Asia, South America for the last 50 years, right? To keep them in debt, to keep them locked down, and to keep them poor. So
I've just shown you growth rates that are well exceeding growth rates in the West, well exceeding them. So obviously what you're saying doesn't make sense, and these were 2021 figures of GDP. So what you're saying is not correct.
Actually, the IMF, World Bank, UN, all of these, USAID, UK aid, they are the new mechanisms of Western imperialism.
So that doesn't make sense from what you're saying. Gross domestic product growth rate in Africa. It's just nonsense what you're saying.
Black and brown people poor so that white people can be rich.
So a growth rate of 131%, 7.6% in Kenya, 7.5%, 9.6% in Niger, Mauritius 6.6%, Uganda 6.3%. There's no growth rate like that in European countries. Not even close. Gambia 6%, Ivory Coast 6%, Cape Verde 5.8%. So what you're saying is nonsense.
You would have supported Boris Johnson's initial decision to cut the aid. Clearly, and
no, because this is the bind you get into, right? Because look, you need the aid because it's so bad. You kind of need aid, right? So cutting aid isn't a solution.
Well, that aid was.
Well, make up your mind.
People die, right?
Yeah, but that aid was going on to things that you criticise in the book. Let me give you the another Jacobin Enlightenment piece of where you are in the book, actually. It's not just the IMF, it is the new class and echelon of people of colour that are created in these developing countries that carry out the colonial enterprise.
The colonial enterprise? Oh my God. All right. So what he's talking about, colonial enterprise, is just capitalism. So so Africans, there's a growing, obviously, African middle class who are very nice people. I met a lot of Africans, really like them, and I've had great relationships with them. And he's basically saying that he's against these Africans becoming richer and basically middle class, and them actually getting out of poverty, which we've seen incredible growth rates in Africa.
Oh yeah, totally. And this is not a new thing either. I think one of the things we miss sometimes is take the British Empire, for example, the largest empire that ever existed. Hundreds of millions of people, slavery, colonialism, all these terrible things, right?
But many countries had colonialism. I don't see him moaning about the Mongols, the Turks, the Arabs, the French, the Germans, the Spanish, the Russians, nearly every country had colonial ambitions, including countries and tribes in Africa.
It could not have existed without countless black and brown people managing and administering empire. Wouldn't have been possible, right? There's always people, when you set up a system of racism or oppression.
What you're talking about racism is just the fact that they were white. You are just an anti-white racist, and I think that's what we're seeing from the BLM. It's just anti-white racism. That's it.
There's always going to be people who take the best option they can for themselves and help to administer it. So India is a great example. At the height of the British Empire, the British Army in India was mostly Indian people, right? So something like the Amritsar massacre, which there was an anniversary just recently, where the army just went and killed like civilians, men, women, and children. Many of those soldiers were Indian. They were Sikh, right? The empire, racism, slavery wouldn't have been possible without those people who are black and brown collaborating. So today, when we see the same thing happening, and we see countries like China, with China just become maybe just as bad as the West, and certainly the same.
Maybe just as bad as the West. I mean, they've killed 45 million Chinese. They've committed genocides. The CCP is one of the biggest mass murdering political party in history. What are you talking about, man?
Logics, when you see the corrupt leaders in Africa, places like that, when you see...
A lot of whom are Marxist as well. I don't know this for a fact, but when Bob Geldof did the things for the Ethiopians, when the Ethiopians were starving, I've got a lot of Ethiopian friends, when the Ethiopians were starving, that was under a communist Marxist regime, I think. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but I know the guy who is from Ethiopia, the World Health Organization, and I'm sure he was part of the Ethiopian Communist Party or something like that, supported probably by the Chinese communists. And I'm sure it was the fault of the Ethiopian communists who actually helped or facilitated in the starvation of Ethiopians, who are a great bunch.
And the politicians like we have in our parliament right now, in our government right now, it's not a new thing. There's nothing to be surprised about at all.
Yeah, I was going to get to them, because Kwasi Kwarteng's been on this show. We shouldn't be overly impressed black and brown people in the Boris Johnson cabinet or Kamala Harris in the White House.
So you basically can't win. So what's the difference in them being there then? If we shouldn't be impressed by them, what's the point in them being there? And what is it that you're trying to replace Western liberalism, Western liberal democracies with? What is your great... Yeah, and nobody has actually alluded to that. I mean, they call it blackness, but blackness is not a political ideology. What's the underlying political ideology that you're trying to replace Western libertarian liberalism with?
This is not a big deal.
I mean, look, if I wanted to be the next Prime Minister, all I have to do is denounce everything I just said, pledge fealty to the Queen, and then maybe Prime Minister. That is not an achievement. Being a black Tory Prime Minister, being a black Tory Minister is not an achievement, because the party has policies which are against us, right? And so what you tend...
definitely tribal against us. So does Professor Andrews not see himself as British then? So he obviously sees himself as some sort of black nationalist then, or no.
What's happening nowadays, particularly, and in the States is no different than here, is there's actually the real identity politics is getting black and brown people to say and do things which are anti-black and brown people. That's identity politics, right? And that's that. But again, that's not new. That's been going on for a long time as well.
So this guy's just a racist. He's basically saying that it doesn't matter if that black or brown person is a conservative or a libertarian liberal like me, or a libertarian or libertarian socialist. That black or brown person has to think the way that Professor Andrews, because of the colour of their skin, wants them to think. And we don't actually know, and this is the question that these guys, commentators, don't ask. What is Professor Andrews' underlying political ideology that all these black and brown people, because of black and brown, which your skin colour isn't an ideology, what Professor Andrews wants them to think like? What is his ideology? He's obviously got some political ideology that he wants them to think like. What is it?
go straight from all the way from Avicenna right through the Enlightenment to a tweet by the Treasury here. You say, what's wrong with the Treasury tweeting? Did you know that in 1833 Britain used 20 million of its national budget to buy freedom for all slaves of the empire? And that, in a sense, we have citizens now who are paying recompense for the slave trade? What's wrong?
Yeah, but they also stopped slavery for the Portuguese, Spanish and Arabic slave trades as well. So they also paid money to actually stop slavery all over the world as well. So they also paid to the slave owners for the freedom of the people who were enslaved as well. So that's not really addressed by Professor Andrews either.
What's wrong with the UK Treasury, Bank of England doing that?
I mean, talk about there's a term I use. I don't think I use it in this book, but I got a next book coming out, The Psychosis of Whiteness. Talk about delusions.
I think Professor Kendi Andrews is just an anti-white racist.
I mean, that tweet was a celebratory tweet from the Treasury or Bank of England about this great, the taxpayer helped to abolish slavery.
And the British also helped to stop slavery as well.
It didn't make me feel better to know that me, my nan, and lots of my family descended from the
who were sold by other Africans as slaves to be transported.
Enslaved have been paying back slave owner compensation in our tax.
Slave owners, but not the people who enslaved you, who were other Africans.
It actually made me feel quite mad, and many people felt quite offended by that.
But you weren't offended when the British actually sent their troops out to stop slavery.
Which brings us to the things we think of progress aren't really progress. So Hilary Beckles, who works at the University of the West Indies, talks about the Abolition Act in 1833 as being one of the most racist pieces of policy that's ever put forward through a British Parliament, even though it abolished slavery. And that's for two reasons. One is that massive payment to the slave owners. So
which compensated them and allowed the slaves to be released.
They actually bailed out slave owners. And it's often, the figures, £20 million, which is often quoted as 17 billion equivalent. It was actually 5% of GDP at the time, which would today be £100 billion. It's a huge payment. It was 40% of the British government's income, which is why the loan takes so long to pay back, right? Because it was such a huge payment. But on top of that, it wasn't just that ridiculous payment to the slave owners. There was also a period of apprenticeship for 4 years. So slavery doesn't actually end until 1838, even though it's abolished in 1833 and comes into law in 1834, because for 4 years, formerly enslaved had to work essentially as slaves for 75% of their time, so they could learn to be free. So the enslaved actually bought, and that amount of free labor is actually calculated to be more than the 100 billion that was given to the slave owners. I mean,
on what basis? What is that? How much would the slave have been paid? Yeah, I'd love to know that figure. How much would the actual slave calculated to have been paid? And how would that have corresponded with other workers, for example, in the UK, who were doing a similar job, like, I don't know, farming, some sort of farming job? I don't think they would get paid very much.
Talk about not progress at all. That's a perfect example of how what we think is progress actually just further cements the racism and colonial logic into the world, and not just in the past. You can see those legacies happening in terms of poverty and who has the wealth today as well.
Yeah, but you make a point there that, I mean, in the context of Barbados, we've heard on so-called mainstream media the terms reparation used very, very rarely. You hear them. You're talking about sums of money that would bankrupt the United States and Britain completely if they had to pay reparations to their former colonies, surely, and former countries where they took slaves.
But based on what? Based on what?
Throw.
But why would they be paying the compensation? Surely it would be the people who enslaved and sold the slaves that would pay the compensation, which would be Africans.
Well, yeah, this is there's no good.
And is there reparations for the white slave trade by Africans? Is there going to be reparations for the slavery by the Moors, Africans in Spain?
Good argument against reparations if you think about unpaid labour.
The country. It would bankrupt.
Is there going to be reparations by the Muslim countries to the Africans as well?
Well, the only good.
And what happens to the people who are enslaved just now?
Is the only one, right? That's the.
But you weren't a slave anyway, so why are people going to give you money for slavery when you've never been enslaved. None of these people are actually enslaved.
The only actual good argument is that we just don't have the money. It's actually impossible to calculate. In America...
Yeah, it's impossible to calculate, because how would you calculate what a farm worker was getting paid in the UK? Say if it was equivalent of what was a farm worker, because a farm worker in the UK was probably getting paid next to nothing.
The calculations anywhere between 4 and 18 billion.
Based on what? Based on what? And why, again, is he's just talking about for the labour? Because if it was for the slavery, surely that would be on the African countries that enslaved and sold the slaves.
Billion, sorry. I think the Caribbean somewhere like 9 trillion, something like that.
£9 trillion. What? I mean, based on what? How many people are there? And what happens? Why am I paying for slavery when my ancestors, as far as I'm aware, never enslaved anybody? And in the Caribbean, some of these people are mixed between the slave and the slave owner. And why am I getting collectively punished for a situation where my family have never owned slaves? And why am I paying for somebody in the Caribbean who may have been a slave that has got really nothing to do with me per se? Why have I got to collectively pay the Caribbean for that? Doesn't make any sense.
Since slavery, India, the record is 9 trillion from India. Like, if you actually...
9 trillion from India? Are these just made up figures? Based on what?
Added up all of this money, it is far too much for ever to be paid back, which is why we should...
Are we going to then start billing the Romans for the invasion of Scotland? Are we going to start billing Norway for the invasion of Scotland? Are we going to start billing the English for the invasion of Scotland? Where are we going to end? Who are we going to? Are we going to start billing the Africans for the Moors, which you've already alluded to, invading Europe? What about the Teutonic Wars, where Hannibal from Carthage, obviously Tunisia now, invaded Europe as well? Are we going to bill the Turks? Are the Turks going to leave what is now Turkey back to Central Europe and go to Constantinople and Byzantine? Where are you? Why would you actually then have a say on what happened in the past? That means we would have to do it for everybody. Why would it only be the transatlantic slave trade?
Use reparations to understand that we actually need a new system, like the economic system.
As the Mongols going to have to pay compensation to the Chinese, the Turks, right through to the Middle East, where they conquered, right through to Russia. Who's actually going to end up having to pay what to who?
And even if you could, let's imagine you could pay it back for a second. If Asia, Africa were as rich as the West, capitalism would literally end tomorrow. It's only because you can steal resources from the African continent for nothing. It's only because you can...
Who's stealing the resources from the African continent for none? And was the African continent super rich prior to colonisation? And what was the actual country by country situations that happened in each of the countries through colonisation? We have to know that. Where are these exorbitant figures coming from? How are these being calculated? Because it just seems like you're plucking them out of the air.
Can say you can get sweatshop labour in China and India for nothing. That this economy functions.
Right. So, but there was already abject poverty in these countries. In fact, capitalism is actually pulling China out. There's more only America's got more billionaires than China now.
So even if it could possibly work and you did make the world equal, the whole economic system would collapse.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want equality anyway. Equality is a stupid concept. So I'm equal to... I'm going to be equal to Floyd Mayweather, the 50 times non-defeated world champion who's getting paid 350 million. I don't resent him. I don't require him to be equal. What do you mean by equal, Professor?
There should be a reminder that we need a new political and economic system.
So now we're getting to it. So what is that political and economic system that you're advocating for? Because I think I know what it is, and it's communism. You're a racist communist.
And there are no reparations that can be paid to fix that problem.
Fix that problem? You're still not giving us the answer.
What do you say to, I suppose it would be upper-class Africans, maybe, that even if...
Probably middle-class Africans.
They tried to carry out the kind of policies that come from the ideas in this book. What happened to Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana? What happened to Cabral in Guinea? What happened to Lumumba in Congo? They all know what happened to the leaders that carry out policies that try to make Africa a fairer and better place.
This is where you need
they were all
a
killed,
proper universalist.
or they all died.
This is yeah, they're killed, died, but this is where we need a proper universalist framework. And the third world movement is that universalist framework, right? It says, look, one country can't do it. Like that's the big problem you find. Like even Haiti, I mentioned Haiti before. Haiti has a revolution, gets rid of slavery, but it's surrounded by all these slaving colonies in America, and is for that reason one of the poorest countries in the world today. In Nkrumah, one country in Ghana, you can't do it. You can only do it when you have unity across at least Africa and across the third world.
So basically, he's talking about being a globalist as well, which is quite interesting.
What happened to Gaddafi with that kind of idea? That's a pretty dangerous idea.
I mean, these are dangerous, but we need dangerous ideas. These are dangerous times. One thing I always remind people is we forget how bad the conditions are. A child dies every 10 seconds because they haven't got access to food and water. Most people in the world do not live in better conditions today than they would have lived 100 years ago.
So I've just shown you the growth rates in Africa for each of the various countries.
It's already too late. I mean, that's the always say it's a Malcolm X quote. It is already too late. We need dangerous ideas.
That's why Cadbury...
So he's basically, I think he's talking about Marxism. I don't know what's in the book, but I think he's basically talking about Marxism. I think I'm going to split this up into 2 days of filming this.
And Cadbury and all these different companies do charity. What are you talking about?
They only can do charity because they can only do charity because they're stealing money from the country.
So they're stealing money, but if you're making these accusations, what facts have we got for this stealing of money?
So, for example, Cadbury, I'm from Birmingham, so I've been to Cadbury a number of times. It's the perfect example of colonialism. I mean, they literally just steal that resource out of the ground.
So they steal it
in Ghana, predominantly Ghana, take it to Birmingham, make it into this fabulous product, and make billions of pounds, and then give someone.
So they steal it from Ghana. So the Cadburys are just walking into Ghana, stealing the whatever they're stealing, and then refining and producing a product. I mean, it's just nonsense what he's saying. It's just absolute waffle. And this guy's a professor in a university.
All that money back in philanthropy.
Well, Cadbury,
that's the problem. There you go.
So they're now giving it back to Africa. And giving money back to Africans. We go.
They say they do everything they can for the welfare of their workers and have improved their environmental impact. I mean, very, very simple.
Okay, well, he's obviously laughing, but I don't know what he's laughing at. There's no context there. So what... He's not said what it is that they're not doing.
Seriously, you talk about in the book, that it is the fear of revolution.
So we're back to revolution, so we're talking about Marxist principles.
Maybe an Enlightenment idea.
So we're anti-modern libertarian liberalism, and we're back to the Marxist revolution that's killed 100 million people.
That is the chief motivator of elites, whether it be the National Health Service, whether it be anything. What do you mean by it is that fear of revolution that has been the motivator of every bit of progress we've ever had?
If you think about why do we get the idea of social democracy and the welfare state, it's only a small part of history really we've had this. After the Second World War, and it is brought on by the fear of communism. There is a genuine fear.
Yes, because they've killed 100 million people.
Yeah, of communism.
So we're back to a racist communist.
You got the East, you got Russia, you got people are rising, and they have to give things over. It's actually really interesting. If you read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, there's a list of things he wants. About half of them happen, right? Because there's a concession to power. We are terrified of communist revolution, therefore we will give you education.
Yeah, this guy's a communist.
We'll give you some benefits, we'll give you housing, etc., to keep you calm, effectively. Same way, how do you get independence in African countries? It's when you have people take up arms, take up revolutionary arms. And
So this guy is a revolutionary in the UK, which is great.
And then so the Queen will come and say, okay, we'll leave you alone. We'll give you this appearance of freedom. And so
we contacted the White House, Cadbury's, HM, Treasury, 10 Downing Street, Somali Federal Government, the United Nations, Barbados High Commission in London, the Royal Family, IMF, USAID and the World Bank, Joseph E. Stephen Pinker and the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the Chinese Embassy in London about the allegations made in this segment, but they did not want to get back to us for the time of the broadcast. I think I've covered most of it, haven't I?
So this is why we're so stuck now. I mean, think about what's happened now and why I always argue we're in a worse position now than we were 50 years ago.
So black, revolutionary, racist, communist. So basically BLM.
All kind of bought into this idea there's no alternative. There are no revolutionary movements anymore, which is why neoliberalism has creeped across the world. The only way to push that back is to have the fear of revolution. It's the fear of revolution always that leads to concessions. And that's why there's no concessions now, because we don't have no revolutionary politics. So if anything we need to do, the number one thing we need to do if we want fundamental change is to bring back that revolution and to make it something that makes the elite scared. And I guarantee you, that's when you'll start to see the changes happen.
We've got a ballot box, so rather than giving Marxist revolutions like yourself, Professor Andrews, any power, I would prefer just to go through the ballot box. Maybe it's about time that we try to break the two-party system.
Professor Kane Andrews, thank you.
Yeah, I'm out here anyway, guys. That's me done with this tonight. Who owned the ships? Yeah, they never talk about who owned the ships. Yeah, that's right. I don't know what all this stuff is here, but yeah, they don't talk about that, mate. Who owned the ships? I think a lot of the Africans talk about who owned the ships, but which I don't actually know. As I said, I'm not a scholar of, so I'm quite happy to stand corrected on who owned the ships and did the Africans actually sell other Africans if it wasn't, and the British went in and actually took Africans out of Africa. I would quite happily stand corrected because I'm certainly not a scholar of it. Anyway, my baby gorillas, you were very quiet tonight. I will love you and leave you, and I'm going to do a second part of this. Good night.